The day my cousin walked down the aisle, wearing my wedding dress, I was standing at the back of the church with my mother's hand pressed over my mouth so my scream wouldn't shatter the stained glass. Let me take you back. My name is Adaeze. I was born in Enugu, the fourth daughter of Chief Okechukwu Maji, a man who believed that a woman's greatest achievement was marrying well. Not working well, not thinking well, marrying well. My father had a philosophy about daughters. He called it return on investment. He spent money raising you, and a good husband was how the money came back. That is the world I grew up in. That is the air I breathed from the moment I learned to walk. My mother, Mama Naji, was a quiet, soft-spoken woman who never raised her voice above a whisper and never raised her opinion above a suggestion. She had 7 children. She had buried 2. She cooked, she prayed, she endured. And when I was growing up, I told myself every single night that I would not be her, that I would build something with my own hands that no man could take from me. I went to the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, studied business administration, graduated with a second-class upper, and came home ready to face the world. But the world in Enugu had not moved while I was gone. My father had arranged in my absence that I would meet the son of his old business associate. This is the language they used, meet, as if it were casual, as if it were my idea. His name was Chidube Mokunkwa. Dube, everyone called him. And when I met him at my uncle's compound during Christmas, he was standing under a mango tree, drinking palm wine and laughing at something his friend had just said. And I thought, God help me, I thought he was the most beautiful man I had ever seen. He was tall in the way that makes people move out of the way when you walk into a room. Dark-skinned, with a jaw you could sharpen a knife on. He had this way of tilting his head when he listened to you, like nothing else in the world existed while you were speaking. He was a civil engineer. He had just come back from a contract in Abuja. He smelled like cedar wood and ambition. And I, who had promised myself I would never be my mother, fell like a mango in a windstorm. We courted for 14 months. Not secretly, openly. Our families knew. His mother, a formidable woman named Mama Dube, visited our compound 3 times in those months. Each visit came with kola nut, with schnapps, with conversation that stretched long into the evening. My father was pleased. My mother was pleased. I was the happiest I had ever been in my life. Dube used to drive to my office on Friday afternoons and sit in his car outside the gate waiting for me to close. He never announced himself. He just waited. And when I walked out and saw his car, something in my chest would lift, like a bird startled from grass. He would drive me to a small restaurant in Independence Layout where we always order the same thing, ofe onugbu, with pounded yam and cold malta. We talked about everything. About his dreams of starting his own construction firm, about my plans to open a consulting agency, about the house we would build. He said he would design it himself, that it would have a garden big enough for a dog and 2 children, that it would face east so the morning light would come in first thing. I believed every word, every single one. My cousin Chisum arrived from Lagos in the 10th month of my courtship with Dube. Chisum was my mother's sister's daughter. Her mother had died when she was 12, and so Chisum had grown up bouncing between relatives, a few months here, a few months there, until she eventually settled in Lagos and built a life for herself in fashion and social media. She was light-skinned in the way that makes people in our town say unnecessary things. She had long, natural hair, and a laugh that filled every corner of every room. She wore clothes that my aunties whispered about and my uncle stared at when they thought nobody was watching. I loved Chisum. I want to be honest about that. Before everything happened, I genuinely, deeply loved her. She was funny and loud, and she knew how to make me feel like myself when the weight of family expectations was trying to flatten me. When she visited, she brought a bag of suya from her favorite spot in Lagos, and we stayed up till 3 in the morning, eating and talking and laughing until our stomachs hurt. She was my person. She was family in the realest sense of the word. I introduced her to Dube on the 2nd week of her visit. We went to a suya spot near Ogui Road, the 4 of us, me, Dube, Chisum, and Dube's friend Emeke. The night was warm, and the music from a nearby shop was drifting over us like a lazy river, and everything felt perfect. Chisum was wearing a yellow off-shoulder top. She was radiant, like she always was. Dube stood up when she approached the table. He was always polite like that, And he shook her hand and she laughed at something he said within the first 30 seconds. And I thought nothing of it. Why would I? He was my man. She was my cousin. Some things you don't even let your mind go near because they seem too ridiculous to consider. The visit was supposed to last 3 weeks. Chisum stayed 4 months. Looking back now, I can see the signs. I was watching them the whole time, but I was reading them wrong, translating them into the language of innocence because that was the language I wanted to speak. I saw how his eyes found her in a crowd. I told myself he was just being friendly. I saw how Chisum started asking questions about him when he wasn't there. Casual questions, the kind you talk inside longer conversations. I told myself she was just curious, just protective of me, wanting to know the man I was planning to spend my life with. When Dube mentioned her name in conversations with me, I told myself it was normal. When Chisum started coming home later on the evening she went shopping, I told myself Lagos girls were simply different. They had more energy, more movement. I was a fool, but not the stupid kind. The kind that sees everything and chooses not to understand because understanding would cost too much. The formal introduction, what we call the imego, was scheduled for October. This is when Dube's family would come to mind with drinks and gifts to officially begin the marriage conversation. My mother had already bought the Ankara fabric for the occasion. My father had been sharpening his negotiating smile. I had quietly, privately begun to look at wedding styles online, saving pictures to a folder on my phone that I had named Garden, so nobody would stumble on it and tease me. 3 weeks before the imego, Chisum told me she was going back to Lagos. She said it simply, over breakfast while I was eating akamu and she was picking a piece of ageje bread. She said she had stayed too long, that her work had to get back to, that Lagos was calling her. She hugged me at the motor park and held on for a few seconds longer than normal, and I remember thinking that she smelt like guilt. But I dismissed it. I packed that thought down underneath everything and told myself I was imagining things. She left on a Tuesday. On Thursday, Dube called me. He said he needed to talk to me about something. His voice was flat, in a way I had never heard before, like all the warmth had been switched off at the source. We met at the restaurant in Independence Layout, our restaurant, where we had eaten ofe Enugu 100 times. He did not order food. He sat across from me and he folded his hands on the table and he said, and I will remember these exact words until the day they put me in the ground. He said, Adaeze, I have to be honest with you. My feelings have changed. I stared at him. I waited for more. Surely there was more. Surely a man who had sat in front of my father 3 times, who had designed a house in his mind with a garden for 2 children and a dog, who had held my hand in that restaurant every Friday for over a year, surely this man had more to say than, my feelings have changed. He said he was sorry. He said he had not meant for this to happen. He said sometimes life takes you by surprise. He hoped I would understand eventually and that he wished me the best, truly, from the bottom of his heart. I sat there for a long time after he left. The waiter came to ask if I needed anything. I said no. I paid for the 2 bottles of water we had barely touched, and I walked to my car, and I drove home, and I sat in the parked car in my father's compound for 1 hour and 40 minutes before I could make my legs move. I did not cry that night. I could not. The grief was too big to come out all at once, like a harmattan storm that's been building for days and finally hits, and you realize you had no idea how strong it was until it strips the roof off the house. I told no one yet, not my mother, not my sisters, not my friends. I kept it inside and let it press against my ribs while I tried to figure out what had gone wrong. I called him twice. The first time, he answered and told me again that he was sorry. The second time, it rang out. I did not call a third time. I have that much pride. 2 weeks later, my aunt, Chisum's mother's older sister, Auntie Ngozi, called my mother. They spoke for a long time. When my mother came to find me in my room afterward, her face was doing something complicated, like it was trying to decide between expressions. She sat on the edge of my bed and she held my hand and she said, Ada, there is something I have to tell you. Chidubem Onkonkwo had gone to Lagos.
He had gone to Lagos and he was with Chisum. Not visiting, not passing through, with her. They had been seeing each other. The word my mother used was close because she could not bring herself to say the real word. They had been close since the Suya night at Ogui Road. Since the very first week my cousin walked into my life carrying Lagos air and a yellow off-shoulder top and her enormous, devastating laugh. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, how? How could she? And I understand why you are thinking it, because I thought it too, over and over and over again, until the question itself became a kind of home I did not want to leave, because while I was still asking it, I did not have to start processing the answer. The answer was, she did it because she wanted him, and she wanted him more than she wanted me. That is it. That is the whole ugly truth. No villain speech, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where she sat me down and explained herself with tears running down her face. She just chose. And Dube chose too. And they had chosen each other while I was still saving wedding photos to a folder called Garden. The months that followed were some of the longest of my life. I lost weight I did not have to lose. I stopped going to Friday soya nights with friends because every soya spot reminded me of that first night at Ogui Road. I stopped listening to certain songs. I started working with a ferocity of a woman who is trying to build a wall around herself, brick by brick, so that nothing can get in and nothing can come out. I registered my consulting firm. I hired 2 people. I started taking clients. I poured everything I had into the work because the work could not betray me. Numbers do not leave you for your cousin. Spreadsheets do not look at someone else and say, my feelings have changed. My father was furious in the way men of his generation are furious when things don't go according to their plan. Not on my behalf, not because his daughter was hurting, but because the arrangement had collapsed. He had already told his friends. He had begun a quiet campaign among the elders of his age group. The broken courtship embarrassed him, and he wore that embarrassment on his face like a rash he couldn't stop scratching. My mother was quietly devastated in the way she was quietly everything. She brought food I didn't eat and sat beside me in silence that said more than any words could. My sisters rallied around me in shifts. Ojekuchuku brought anger on my behalf. Nena brought prayers. Amara brought gossip about Dube that was mostly invented but very satisfying to listen to. What nobody talked about, what everyone deliberately stepped around like a crack in the floor, was Chisum. Because Chisum was family. And in our world, the things family does to you are not supposed to be spoken about too loudly. You cry in private, you forgive in public, you say God is in control at the dinner table, and you swallow everything else with your food. 11 months passed. I had begun, slowly and painfully, to stitch myself together, not because time heals everything. That is a lie people tell you because the truth is too heavy to carry, but because I was stubborn, and I refused to let this be the thing that broke me. I was building my firm. I had started jogging in the mornings. I had started laughing again, real laughter, not the kind that is polite. I was, against all odds, beginning to be okay. And then, my Uncle Chukwuemeka, my mother's brother, called my father to say that his son Tobena was getting married. This was good news. Tobena was a good man, quiet and steady, a doctor who had just come back from a fellowship in Germany. Everyone in the family liked Tobena. His wedding was going to be big, the kind of wedding that families in Enugu would talk about for 5 years. The church was booked, the hall was booked, the caterers were booked. The asoebi was a deep burgundy and gold that my mother said made her look 20 years younger when she tried on the fabric. My mother told me about the wedding with shining eyes. I smiled and said I was happy for Tobena. And I was, genuinely. I had room in me for that. The invitation came 3 weeks before the event. White card with gold lettering, traditional and beautiful. I read it 3 times. The ceremony was on Saturday at St. Paul's Anglican Church, Enugu. Reception to follow at Presidential Hotel.
I went shopping for something to wear. I chose a deep green gown that my friend Ifeoma said made me look like a queen. I had my hair done the Thursday before. I practiced smiling in the mirror. Not because my smile was fake, but because I knew this would be a long day with many faces and I wanted to be ready. Saturday morning came. The air was thick and golden the way Enugu mornings are in Harmattan season. That particular kind of dry warmth that sits on your skin like a soft cloth. I dressed carefully. I sprayed perfume on my wrists and the base of my throat. I rode with my parents to the church. The church was already filling when we arrived. Flowers everywhere. White lilies and burgundy roses spilling out of tall vases at the end of every pew. An orchestra was playing something gentle and string-heavy near the front. The air smelled like massed flower perfume and new fabric and that particular kind of excitement that only exists in churches on wedding days. We found our seats. My father was already greeting people 3 pews away. My mother was straightening her jelly. I sat down and opened the wedding program and started reading it the way you do when you're trying to look occupied. The ceremony began. The groom's party came in first. Tobena looking overwhelmed and happy in a white agbada with gold embroidery, flanked by his groomsmen in matching burgundy. My aunties made appreciative sounds. My uncle Chukwemeka was already crying. I smiled. It was beautiful. I let myself feel the beauty of it. Then the wedding march began, and the doors at the back of the church opened, and the first bridesmaid walked in, and the second, and the third, all in that deep burgundy and gold, and then the flower girl, and then the bride. My eyes went to the bride automatically, the way everyone's eyes do. She was moving slowly, deliberately, the way brides are trained to move, and she was stunning. Veil floating behind her, dress catching the light in 100 places. There was a collective intake of breath from the congregation. I felt it in my own chest. This was a beautiful wedding. And then she turned slightly as she passed my row, and the veil shifted, and I saw her face. It was Chisum. Not someone who looked like Chisum, not a hallucination produced by a year of grief. Chisum, my cousin. Chisum with her light skin and her long natural hair pinned under a veil. Chisum with her too wide smile. Chisum who ate my suya and slept in my mother's house and listened to me talk about the house with the garden facing east. I stopped breathing. My mother's hand landed on mine so fast and so hard that I looked at her, and her face told me she had known. Not everything, maybe, but something. She had known something about today that she had not told me, and her face now was a mixture of shame and desperate apology and the specific kind of helplessness that comes from knowing you should have done something differently and it is too late now. I looked back at the aisle, and walking beside Chisum, walking her down the aisle with his hand over hers, tall and dark and cedar-scented, his jaw set the way I used to love it when he was thinking hard about something, was Chidubem Okonkon, my Dubi, Tobena's best man. I do not have the language for what happened inside me in that moment. It was not one emotion. It was a collision of 20 emotions at once, each one fighting the others, none of them winning. Shock, humiliation, a grief so sharp it felt physical, like someone had pushed a finger into a wound I thought was healing. Rage, quiet,
white hot, the kind that doesn't make noise, and something else underneath all of it, a terrible, wretched clarity, the kind that comes too late, that shows you everything you missed while you were too busy trusting people. They had moved in together in Lagos. They dated. And now, less than a year after Dube told me his feelings had changed, he was walking my cousin down the aisle at my family's wedding while I sat in a pew wearing green and holding a wedding program with my name in the family of the groom section. My mother pressed my hand harder. I did not run. I want you to understand that. I wanted to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stand up, to leave, to not sit in that church and watch this happen in front of 200 people who all knew who I was and who she was and exactly what this meant. But I did not run, because I am my mother's daughter in one way at least. I know how to endure in public. I know how to hold my face together when everything behind it is coming apart. I sat through the vows. I sat through the prayers. I sat through the moment when the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," and the church erupted, and my aunt was sobbing with joy, and my uncle Chukwemeka was pressing his handkerchief to his eyes, and Tobena was kissing his bride, and Dube was clapping and smiling in the front row like a man with no memory. Like a man who had never sat across a table from me in a restaurant in Independence Layout and promised me a garden facing east. I sat through all of it. At the reception, I found a table near the back and I sat down and I folded my hands in my lap and I watched, because that was all I could do. The tables were decorated beautifully. The food smelled wonderful. The DJ was excellent. My family moved around me like water around a stone, some of them catching my eye with expressions that ranged from pity to embarrassment to studied innocence. Nobody said anything direct. Nobody was going to say anything direct. This was a wedding. The truth was too heavy for a wedding day. Chisum danced at the reception. She was a beautiful dancer. She always had been. She moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who had never done anything wrong, or who had made her peace with it so thoroughly that she could no longer feel the weight. At one point, she danced past my table and our eyes met. 1 second. 2 seconds. She did not stop. She did not say anything. She gave me a look that I have spent years trying to decode. It was not triumphant. It was not cruel. It was something more complicated than both of those things. And then she moved on, and the music swallowed her. Dube did not come near me at all. Not once. He knew exactly where I was sitting the entire evening, the way you always know where the person you've wronged is standing in any room. He stayed at the other end of the hall and laughed with the groomsmen and drank and danced and did not look at me once, which I found more insulting than anything else he could have done, because it told me that he had not merely stopped loving me, he had erased me. I was a page he had already turned. I left before the cake cutting. I told my mother I was tired. She looked at me with her eyes full of everything she couldn't see, and she held my face in both her hands for a moment, and then she let me go. My driver took me home. I walked into my room and I sat on the floor, not the bed, the floor. And I stayed there until the light coming through my window changed from evening orange to night blue. And then something happened inside me. Not dramatically, not with thunder. It was quiet, like a door closing in a distant part of a house. Something shifted, locked, settled into a new position, and I made myself a promise. I was done being the woman things happened to. The next Monday morning, I went into my office at 7 a.m. I looked at every account, every client file, every proposal I had been letting sit. I called meetings, I made decisions, I started building, not because I had recovered, not because I was healed, but because I had decided that the story of my life was not going to be told as a tragedy about a man who left me and a cousin who took him. Those people were going to be a chapter, a short one, and the rest of the book was mine. Over the next 2 years, I built my firm into one of the most respected small consulting agencies in Enugu. I hired 7 people, I got a contract with a state government agency, I gave a talk at a business conference in Abuja that 3 women came up to me after and said changed the way they thought about ambition. I bought a car, I bought land, I started designing in my mind a house with a garden. Not facing east, facing any direction I wanted, because it was mine. I started dating again, carefully, slowly, without the urgent desperation that heartbreak can sometimes create in people. I went on dates that went nowhere and was okay with that. I went on dates that went somewhere small and was okay with that too. I stopped measuring men against Dube's ghost, which was the most important thing I did. I stopped letting a man who left me define what I was looking for in a man who might stay. And eventually, about 18 months after the wedding, I met Emeka. Not Dube's friend Emeka, a different Emeka. Emeka Chukwudi, an accountant from Awka, who had built a small empire of investment portfolios and had the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. He was not dramatic, he did not look like a mango tree, he did not smell of cedar wood. He was ordinary in the best possible way, solid, consistent, truthful in ways that felt almost unremarkable until you realize how rare actual truth was in a person. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he said he would call. He did not make me guess. He did not make me perform. He asked me once, early in our courtship, why I seemed sometimes to watch him from a distance, even when I was sitting next to him. And I told him the truth. Not all of it at once. Truth, when you carry a lot of it, has to be released slowly, or it floods the room. But enough. He listened without getting defensive or impatient or making it about him. And then he said, I'm not him, but I understand why it takes time to believe that. I loved him for that sentence alone. We courted for 2 years. His family came to mine with kola nut and schnapps and conversation. My father, by this point, had learned some humility. The broken first arrangement had taught him that his investment theory of daughters was a philosophy with serious structural flaws. He sat across from Emeka's family with a quieter kind of dignity, and for once he asked me afterward what I thought before he said anything else. Progress, however small, is still progress. Our wedding was in July, a Saturday, the kind of day that feels chosen on purpose, bright and full and warm without being cruel. I wore a dress I designed with a seamstress in Enugu, ivory with hand-embroidered flowers at the hem. My sisters were bridesmaids. My mother cried from the moment we left the house and did not stop until well into the reception. My father held my arm as we walked and for once said nothing, which was the best thing he could have offered me. Emeka was waiting at the altar. He was waiting for me the way a man waits when he is certain, not nervous, not shifting from foot to foot, but still and grounded like a tree that knows where it is planted. When I reached him and he took my hand, he squeezed it twice. That was all. 2 squeezes. I understood what they meant. The vows we wrote ourselves. I stood in front of 200 people and I said, among other things, that love is not supposed to cost you yourself, that when it is real, it adds to you rather than subtracts, and that I had learned the difference not in the easy years but in the hard ones. I said that I was not standing at this altar despite everything I had survived, but because of it, that the woman who sat on a floor in a green dress had made a decision, and the decision had led here. There was not a dry eye in the church, including mine. What happened to Dube and Chisum? You want to know. Of course you do. I will tell you. Not because I want to say I told you so, though I will be honest, there is a very small human part of me that felt something when I found out, but because the story would be incomplete without it. They moved to Lagos permanently after the wedding. For a while, by all accounts, things were fine. Chisum had her fashion work. Dube had begun a new engineering contract. They posted on social media the way people do when they are trying to confirm something to themselves and everyone around them simultaneously. The photos were beautiful. The captions were optimistic. I saw some of them in the early months before I made the decision to stop looking, because some grief you have to protect yourself from like a flame you can see but shouldn't touch. By the 3rd year, people started talking. My Aunt Ngozi, never want to keep a story inside when it was burning to come out, told my mother that Chisum and Dube had begun difficulties, that he was away frequently on contracts and came back different every time, that money had become an argument that lived in their house rent-free, that the thing that starts in betrayal sometimes cannot find solid ground because the foundation was never clean. I do not know the full truth of their marriage. I only know the pieces that reached me through the family channels that carry everything eventually, regardless of how tightly you close the windows. What I know is that by the time I married Emeka, Dube and Chisum were in a silent war that neither of them was winning. What I know is that the photographs stopped appearing. What I know is that Chisum called my mother once, only once, and my mother sat afterwards in the kitchen for a very long time without saying anything.
She never told me what Chisum said. I never asked. There are some conversations that belong to the people who had them, and some things that would not help me to know. What I can tell you is this. I was not glad. Or I tried not to be glad. I am being honest with you. There were moments, brief ones, when something in me that I am not proud of felt a jolt of satisfaction at the news of their struggles. That is a human thing. It is an ugly human thing, but it is human. What I chose to do with it was put it down, because carrying their suffering as my victory would have made me smaller, and I had spent too long building myself larger to throw that away on bitterness. My life with Emeka was not a fairy tale in the dramatic sense. It was better than that. It was real. It was Saturday mornings when he made eggs because he knew I didn't have the patience to cook before 10 a.m. It was disagreement about money that we had at the table and resolved at the table without anyone sleeping elsewhere. It was a pregnancy that scared both of us and thrilled both of us in equal measure, and a daughter born in March who came into the world screaming like she had something to say and has not stopped since. We named her Chidima. It means God is good. She is the loudest, most opinionated small person I have ever encountered, and I love her with a ferocity that surprises me every single day. We built our house. It is not the one Dube designed in his mind. It is better, because it is real. It has a garden. I planted it myself. I chose the direction it faces. There is a thing that happens to you when you survive the thing you thought would destroy you. Not right away. It takes time. Sometimes years, but eventually you reach a place where you can look at the worst thing that ever happened to you and understand that it was not the end of your story. It was the story. The whole thing, the wound and the healing and the building and the living, all of it is the story, and you are the one telling it. I am telling you to now, not because Dube matters. He does not in the way he used to. He is a person who once walked out of my life, and what he left behind was space that I chose to fill with better things. Not because Chisum matters, not in the wound that bleeds way. She is someone I will always carry a complicated feeling about. Love and grief and anger all wound together in a shape that has no clean name. But she does not have power over my days anymore. She made her choices. I made mine. I am telling this story because there is someone watching this right now who is sitting in a parked car in someone's compound, unable to make their legs move. Someone who has just found out that the person they trusted chose someone else, or that the family member they loved chose their own desire over their cousin's heart. Someone who is in the worst part of the story right now and cannot see past it. I need you to hear me. You will see past it. Not today. Maybe not this year, but the ground will return under your feet. Your appetite will come back. The music you couldn't listen to will become music you can play at full volume again. The work you pour yourself into will begin to reward you. The person who is coming, who sees you clearly and stays anyway, is not a fantasy. They are on their way. You cannot rush them, and you cannot find them by running from yourself. You find them by becoming so fully yourself that they can recognize you from across any room. The house you will build will have a garden. Plant it yourself. Choose the direction it faces. And when someone asks you how you survived the worst chapter of your story, you will say what I am saying to you now. I decided the chapter would end.
And then I turned the page.